All right, so we're going to talk a little bit in this short video about Hebrew history. And we're going to start with the time period of Abraham, one of the first leaders that we can find historically in the history of the people of Israel, the people of Judea. You probably recall from biblical studies, or maybe this is the first time you thought of it, but we think that we can historically date Abraham to about 1800 BC. We can find him, we're pretty sure, in the region of Mesopotamia, but also in the region that we have come to call Canaan, or the Promised Land. We'll see a map in a second. Politically, Abraham is identified as a patriarch. We think the Hebrews are essentially tribal in their earliest history, that they are nomadic, and we can find them archaeologically settled around great cities, not necessarily living in the cities, keeping themselves apart from the cities because their form of religion, their monotheism, is very different from the other people around them. So they seem to keep themselves a bit separate. So we can find them archaeologically, which is very interesting. We can find them around Mesopotamia. We can find them in Canaan, or what we would call Palestine, ancient Israel, about the years around 1800 BC. Abraham, as you know, is a patriarch. He is, tradition maintains, chosen of God to be the leader of the Hebrews. And he's chosen of God to be the leader of the Hebrews because he had to endure an extraordinary test, a test of faith, a test of obedience, some might say. And this relates to his son Isaac. As you know the story of Abraham and Isaac, the young Isaac was a gift, a long-awaited child of Abraham and Sarah. And they were quite old when Isaac was born, so he was much beloved, much anticipated, and their only son. Now, Abraham did have another child named Ishmael. But this child was born of a maid in the household, not his wife, and this is Hagar. When Isaac was finally conceived and born, Ishmael is made to leave the house because he is seen as illegitimate. He is not the child of Abraham and Sarah. So it is Isaac in the Hebrew tradition who will maintain the covenant, who will keep that connection to Abraham and God. Ishmael, you may know, just to add a little more controversy to this whole topic, is considered by the people of Islam to be the old ancestor of Muhammad. So both Islam and Judaism lay claim to Abraham as a great leader. The covenant. You'll see this in your selection from Deuteronomy that you have in your Andrea Overfield. Please do read that. We should have a presentation, I think, on Monday on this one. If not, we'll figure that out. But at any rate, in Deuteronomy, you get a description of the covenant. That is that arrangement, that agreement between God and the Hebrews, that the Hebrews are the chosen of God, and God will protect them in return for their faithfulness, for their keeping God's covenant, keeping God's law, being good to one another, maintaining a good community. And in return, as you know, that covenant empowers the Hebrews in their history and in their movement. The story of Abraham and Isaac is that God asks Abraham to sacrifice, to kill this boy Isaac, this long-awaited son. Of course, Abraham does go through with the test only to have God stay him, keep him from doing that in the end. This is the region, this is our map of the region that Abraham is trying to get to, that Abraham establishes the covenant with God in. And you see very important areas here. You certainly see the place of the Phoenicians we've talked about earlier. You see Samaria, Jerusalem, and you see also what will develop, and that's a division of the kingdom of Israel, separate from the kingdom of Judah. But this, in the time of Abraham, all one region, not demarked by these colors that you have here, the region that Abraham is trying to get to. The history of the Hebrews is dominated by these great father figures, these great patriarchs. And we can move forward in time to the story of Joseph. We have Abraham and Canaan, Abraham and the region of Israel. Joseph is connected to the stories of how the Hebrews get down to Egypt. Joseph's father is Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. You know that number is important because it represents the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jacob has many brothers, but Joseph has many brothers, but Joseph is Jacob's favorite child. And because he is Jacob's favorite son, Jacob dotes on him, gives him this wonderful coat of many colors that his brothers do not have the same kind of consideration, don't have the same kind of privilege in many regards. So Joseph creates some jealousy, or the treatment of Joseph by Jacob creates jealousy, if you will. The other thing to know about Joseph is that he has a talent. He seems to be able to interpret dreams. Again, this comes straight from the Bible as our source here. The importance of this dream talent shows up when Joseph finds himself in Egypt. He finds himself in Egypt because his brothers have finally decided to get rid of him. They are not pleased with his being the favorite, and so they sell him into slavery to a man going down to Egypt. Joseph runs afoul of that household and winds up in jail. Read Genesis, you can find out all the soap opera elements there. But while he is in jail, it comes to the Pharaoh's attention in Egypt that Joseph can interpret dreams. He's been interpreting dreams for other people in jail. And the Pharaoh has been having bad dreams. The Pharaoh has been dreaming about, 7 fat stalks of grain being laid low by 7 skinny stalks of grain. 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 skinny cows, right? So it's a very weird kind of dream. Joseph is brought in and, of course, as you know, interprets these dreams to relate to the fact that Egypt is going to have 7 good years of crops and food, and that following that, Egypt will have 7 bad years of famine. So the smart Pharaoh would store up during these good years for the lean years that are coming. Well, as you know, this indeed turns out to be the case. The dream does come true. Joseph is seen as something of a great advisor and becomes the right-hand man to the Pharaoh. The story continues, of course, that Joseph's brothers then come down to Egypt because the famine comes to the whole world, and the Hebrews come down to Egypt in the guise of Joseph's brother. They are made to ask Joseph for forgiveness. He does indeed forgive them, and they are allowed to come to Egypt and live. That's one version of how the Hebrews get down to Egypt, right? Then the Bible tells us there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, a Pharaoh who comes forward and is not happy with the Hebrew presence. And we think this may be, in Egyptian history, this may be the beginning of the new kingdom. That maybe Joseph and his brothers, the people of Israel, the tribes of Jacob, come down to Egypt in that second intermediary period that we talked about in Egypt. So they may be part of outsiders coming in that's represented by those Hyksos people who invade, we think, around 1500. At any rate, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and from this point forward, we find that the Hebrews are enslaved in Egypt. That brings us up to the story of Moses, and many of you know the story of Moses. He is this great hero in Hebrew history, and maybe we don't need to go through all of the elements there, but just in case, Moses, as you know, is the child of a Hebrew slave, and the Bible tells us that Pharaoh was concerned that the slaves were becoming unruly, that they were becoming too numerous, that they had started to have these ideas that, hey, there's a new leader who's going to free us, there is a prophesied Messiah coming, something to that effect. And so the argument is that Pharaoh says, well, let's put down that talk of revolution and we will kill all the firstborn male sons of the Hebrews this year. Well, Moses' mother, in a very dramatic turn, says, not my child, and she takes Moses as a baby, puts him into a basket, the story goes, and floats him down the Nile River. Now, he's not alone. We understand that his sister Miriam is watching, tending the basket, keeping away crocodile, hippopotami, and the basket floats to a palace of the Pharaoh, and one of the members of Pharaoh's household, maybe his wife, maybe his sister, maybe a niece, a daughter, a woman who is childless, has been praying for a child. And here is Moses. Moses means gift of the Nile, gift of the river. Well, I don't have much here on my PowerPoint, but he seems to be raised in the house of Pharaoh about the time of Ramses II. And you may remember when we talked about Egypt, if we talked about Ramses, I think we did in this class, that Ramses was a great and powerful Pharaoh in the New Kingdom era, the time when Egypt is getting its wonderful empire. Ramses, a great and powerful leader. My theologian friends will tell you that this is the time when the Hebrews need a new leader, and where to learn how to lead than in the house of the Pharaoh. So in his early days, Moses is being raised alongside, if you will, at the same time as Ramses, learning how to run a great empire. As he grows up, he has hints of who he is, but he's confused. We seem to understand. And at one point, when he's out and about in Egypt, he sees an Egyptian guard beating a Hebrew slave, and this incenses him, this enrages him, so much so that he kills the Egyptian guard. Well, this is wrong. Murder is wrong in any, either whether you're Egyptian or Hebrew, you cannot do this, and so he flees. He goes into the wilderness to try to figure out what's going on with him. When he gets out there, he meets the woman who will be his wife, and he has this interesting connection to his family. He's starting to figure out who Aaron, his brother, is, who Miriam, his sister, is. So there's things going on revealing who he is. And he happens upon this extraordinary vision, this burning bush, a bush in the desert that burns but is not consumed by fire, right? And this is an amazing experience. So he listens to this burning bush, and of course it's the voice of God telling him that he has a job to do, that he must go back to Egypt, free the Hebrews from Egyptian slavery, and escort them to their promised land, back to Palestine, back to Canaan, back to what will be Israel. Well, he goes back to Pharaoh, tells him what the plan is, and Pharaoh, of course, says, no, you may not release the Hebrews. You may not free them. That's just not going to fly. We have an empire here. We have slaves that help us maintain what we do here, and if I let the Hebrews go, I let the Phoenicians go. If I let the Phoenicians go, I let the Syrians go. No, we cannot do this. You probably know the story continues that God visits plagues, some 10 plagues upon Egypt in retribution. And they're extraordinary plagues, one where the sun is blotted out, one where the river turns to blood, one where hail or fire and brimstone destroys the crops. And my theologian friends will say, again, this is an interesting time because it's sort of like the God of the Hebrews taking on the gods of Egypt one by one, right? And showing that the power of the one true God is greater than all of these false gods. This leads us to the business of the Exodus. The final plague is the firstborn. This is a vengeful God. This is a retribution God, that just as the Pharaoh took out the firstborn among the Hebrews, now God will take out the firstborn among Egypt. If you're Jewish and you understand that this is coming, you put the blood of the lamb on your door so that this terrible plague will pass over your house. So this is the origin of Passover. Once this happened, the Pharaoh allows the Hebrews to leave, and Exodus, the Greek word for exit, way out, is what follows afterwards. As you probably know, the Pharaoh goes through various stages of grief and finally decides, as the Hebrews are leaving, no, I won't allow this to happen, and sends an army after them. And that's where you get this extraordinary event of the parting of the Red Seas, as the Hebrews go through that very muddy space, and just as they pass through, the waters come back and envelop Pharaoh's army. So one of those amazing stories out of the Bible. When the Hebrews leave Egypt, they wind up at Mount Sinai, and again we'll get back to that map to show you that. Yeah, here we go. They get to Mount Sinai, and this is this image down towards the center of your map. And it's there that we have another miraculous occurrence, in that Moses is approached by God, or Moses and his brother Aaron go up the mountain to speak with God. They're up there for 40 days and 40 nights, long time. And they are getting the law. They are getting the covenant written in stone, right? So this is an amazing historical event for them. And when Moses finally comes back, and he's got the tablets upon which are written the laws, the covenant in writing now. He gets to the bottom of the mountain, and there he finds the people of Israel, the people of his tribes, are have become frightened. They have given up their faith. They are fashioning images of a golden calf that are reminiscent of Egyptian gods and goddesses. Back in Egypt, we had water. Back in Egypt, we had food. Here in the desert, Mount Sinai, we have nothing. And where is Moses? He's gone. Has God forsaken us? Moses comes down the mountain, and he's angry that they've lost faith, and he smashes these tablets that God has given him. One of Moses's problems in this story is that he's quick to anger, right? He's killed the Egyptian. He smashes the tablets. He has to go back up the mountain and get another copy. Yeah. So this is one of his character flaws. It'll come back to haunt him. At any rate, Moses restores the covenant to the people, and for the next 40 years, they will make their way back to the promised land from Sinai, back to the kingdom of Israel to be. Moses himself won't get in. He may look upon it, but he can't get in. They're doomed to do this for 40 years because they've broken the covenant, and this will be their punishment, so the next generation can get in. Moses, as you probably know, we said he's quick to anger. At one point there's an incident with a rock. The people are thirsty, and Moses prays to God, can I get some water for my people? And God says, of course, just there's a rock over here, talk to the rock, tap the rock, and water will spring forth. And Moses is impatient and pounds the rock with his staff, right? And so God's like, Moses, you are just too impatient. So he too may look upon the promised land but not enter. So this is a tough God. We said this before. Monotheism is difficult. It's discipline-oriented. It's faith-based. And it's very hard on the Hebrews, this relationship with God. And they sustain it into the promised land. When they get to the promised land, they'll have to fight their way in. Make no mistake, it's not going to be easy. But when they get there, they have to settle on how will we be governed. When they were nomadic, they used the patriarchal system, the patriarch. They used the tribal system. When they settle, you'll still see some elements of that tribal element hang on. But they opt for kingship. They opt for kingship. And you probably know their first king is Saul. Saul is famous for having to fight the Philistines. You'll later see more of that with David. David fights Goliath. Goliath is a Philistine. These are other people who live in this region, and the Hebrews will have to claim their land. Saul, very famous as the first king for the Hebrews. We don't have a lot on him. His reign is rather short, but he starts the process of establishing the kingdom. David, you probably know more about. David follows Saul, and again, he very famous for fighting the Philistines, fighting the giant that is Goliath, and he will make Israel a very large state, the largest it's ever been in history. He's such a good military leader. But we want to get quickly to Solomon, who follows David. Solomon, very famous for his wisdom, for being very wealthy, for making Israel a stable kingdom. He has a lot of diplomatic negotiations with lots of different states all around him, whether it's Egypt or whatever's the various kingdoms in Mesopotamia, Turkey. He's very good at creating trade negotiations with these folks. He works very well with the people of Israel to come up with a way to build the first temple in Jerusalem and to finance it. Right? So there are 12 tribes in Israel. There are 12 months of the year. Each tribe will take 1 month, and the taxes from each tribe will support the temple for 1 month of the year. Yeah? He is also very famous for, again, he's famous for being wise. You know this, right? The wisdom of Solomon. It goes back to that story of two women who both claim that one child is each theirs. And no one can decide in their family, in their local tribe, and it finally gets to Solomon, and he has to, as you know, in that story, decide which woman is the actual mother. He threatens to kill the child, to split it in half, and you might be thinking of similar imagery with Abraham and Isaac and splitting that child as a sacrifice to God, yeah? But just as he is about to cut the child in half, one of the women stands up and says, no, that is says, I will give up that child. She says, let him live. I give up my claim. And Solomon says, there's a woman who should be a mother. She would give up the child rather than see the child die. Yeah. So wise, wealthy, because he put Israel on the map with great trade deals with other kingdoms, great diplomatic deals, kept Israel very safe in this part of the world. He's very famously known for having diamond and gold mines in Africa. That's all legendary, who knows for sure. But the women, another W in my list, the prophets, and you see their writings in the Old Testament, the prophets suggest that Solomon just has too many wives. The Bible says he had 300 wives and another 600 concubines, so 900 women in his harem. Solomon's got a harem. Oh my goodness. So why? Well, I think first off it might be a bit of an exaggeration. Let's start there, because I do believe that the prophets did not care for a lot of Solomon's rule, and this is one of the things that they blamed him for. But also keep in mind, when you are a king in the Middle East, in antiquity, like a pharaoh, like a King Hammurabi, you typically have a lot of wives to ensure the succession, but also because with every diplomatic negotiation you make, you typically pick up a family connection to the other king. So there's a lot of that going on. Not here to excuse it or anything, but just to suffice it to say that the prophets, and their writing shows up in the Old Testament, of course, as does Solomon's, the prophets argue that Solomon is tempting the covenant. Solomon is making things hard for us. God does not want us to be so worldly. God does not want us to be so wealthy. God does not want so many women in the household. Right? Keep in mind too, when with regard to polygamous marriages, that the Hebrews have settled down. They used to be nomadic. They used to be territorial, always on the move, and it was not unusual to have more than one wife for one man. Once we settle down, the Hebrews tend to be more monogamous. It is more difficult to maintain more women in a steady household. Life expectancies are longer, children survive better, and so Solomon, while it's not wrong to have multiple wives, it's just not really the custom anymore. We've kind of walked away from that. So you probably know that he will die as king of Israel, but he has multiple sons, all those wives, and two of his sons come forward, and one argues that Dad was right, we should continue the ways of Solomon. Another steps up and argues, no, the prophets are right, Dad was tempting the covenant, we've got to go a different route. And there are enough people in the state that support one son, enough people in the state that support the other son, and after Solomon dies, the kingdom splits. This is going to make Israel vulnerable. And when we get to our next video, you'll see just exactly how.